It's not in a book. It's not A plus B equals C. It's not algebra. It doesn't work that way. So how does it work? Why is there suffering? And so then it just pushes me. And so that's where I was like, that's a long intro to get to talking about suffering. Because for me, that is sort of the quintessential thing. There's something in it that it changes us. And it's horrible, and it's painful, and it's necessary, and it's beautiful in its own way.
When life throws a challenge at you, one thing is certain. To find a resolution for every issue, every problem, for everybody, there's more than one way. So it's good to be back. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we've got a surprise. Today we have Chris Hackett with us as our
Whitney.
special guest. So we're excited to have you, Chris. Thank you for
it's fun to be here.
Joining us.
I am not new. I am very new to podcasts.
Yeah,
so this is all new.
Pretty cool. Chris is kind of new to the podcast format. So we've been talking a little bit about how that works and what it is, but we're just going to have a discussion today. And Chris had been talking about a few things he wanted to share, and we thought this would be a good kind of format to do that. So
yeah, well, since it's Lent, I went right to suffering. So
perfect.
I
Perfect.
thought we could talk about suffering, Whitney. But then I was like, I don't know if we really want to just talk about suffering. There's a lot of suffering going on right now, so maybe we could lighten it up a little bit.
Okay.
But that started me thinking about what do we do with suffering, and what do we do with theodicy, the problem of evil, and just those hard questions that religion says they answer, but in my mind don't give good enough answers to.
What do you mean by that, as far as not giving good enough answers?
So let's start with the basic question of good and evil. If we have a dualistic concept of a good God and a bad devil, is there some other power that allows that devil to do the bad stuff, or does the devil just have the willing the allowance of God Almighty to go ahead and do all this stuff to us? So it's either God allows it, or there's something else out there, right?
Gotcha.
I don't know how else to get at it. So that's where I go with this stuff. And so that's why I wanted to talk with you, because I get at this stuff philosophically, and then I got into systematic theology trying to find answers. And what I found was that the answers can only get you so far in theology. So I don't know how we want to get into that.
Well, I'd love to hear more about your journey. You talked about kind of going into philosophy and where that led you. So I'd be curious, was that something you always had an interest in, or kind of what sparked your curiosity, let's say?
Yeah, I've always liked philosophy. I have an older brother, so he was pretty instrumental, influencing my life. He was a philosophy major. He's 8 years older than me.
Okay.
So when I graduated from high school, the first book he gave me was Alan Watts' The Book. And if you don't have that book, or if you don't know that book, I recommend it. It's called The Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are.
Wow.
And Alan Watts was one of these cats that was back in the 50s with Aldous Huxley and all these guys. And good stuff. He sort of synchronized a lot of Eastern thought with Western Christianity, and sort of brought contemplative thought back into, and more, I don't know, just a more Eastern philosophical mindset back into Western thought, and tried to meld them two. And it was really influential on me. And so then when I got to college, I had a class of classical philosophy, and my instructor was this Jewish man, and I loved it. I fell in love with the class. And so I asked him to go to coffee with me, and he said yes. And so we went and had coffee, and I had never had espresso. I'm some kid from Chattanooga. And so and he orders an espresso, and I'm like, I'll have one of those. And so I was like, this is good. And so then I think I had 4 of those suckers, in about 30, 40 minutes. And he just let me order them. He was this New York Jewish guy, and he was hysterical. And he got me into philosophy, man. And we just started talking. And we have 4 double shots of espresso. You're going full force. Yeah. So that guy got me into philosophy. And then philosophy was great, but philosophy always came the God question. Philosophy could get you to God, but then when it gets to God, they just stop. And my thing with philosophical traditions are great, but it's like you're just running as far as you can with a thought until it doesn't make any sense anymore. It's like almost all philosophical thoughts are good to a degree.
Yeah.
And I would say it's sort of similar to theology, and that's where we get into heresy. Because all of our theology is good to a degree, but then if we just keep rolling to it to the nth degree, I think we start getting into heretical thoughts almost.
Like we're trying to shift it or shape it ourselves more
yes,
so, or
yes, and it's not. How do I articulate this? It's not in the extremes. The truth is not in the extremes. And philosophical thought will try to take you to the extremes because that's what our logic will do. Hegelian thought said that we have a thesis, and then we have an antithesis, and then that gives us a synthesis. And so two becomes one, and we continuously do this. So if we're logically doing that, and we're just going to keep going to an extreme, I don't think we can find truth if we keep going to those extremes. So that was my undergrad experience with philosophy. Enjoyed philosophy, ended up majoring in it with religious studies and everything. So I loved it. I had to take every single class just to get my GPA up in order to graduate. Because I had partied so hard and gotten W's for so many years that I had to get a
Well, you have so
GPA
many. I mean,
up,
you have so many there to use, right? You don't want to let those W's go to waste. It's like timeouts at the end of a game, right? Why waste them? You got to burn them all.
So anyway, by the time I walked the stage, the head of the philosophy department shook my hand and was like, "We are so glad to see you leave Hackett."
Oh my gosh. So in your mind, what was your plan with that?
I had no plan, man.
That was the philosophy.
Bartending.
So talk to me about the intersection of bartending and philosophy. Were you sharing thoughts and ideas behind the bar with people?
Yeah, so that's actually really helpful, Whitney, because part of my problem was when I was studying philosophy in undergrad, and I'd gotten all into philosophy and I'd gotten to a stuck place. And I kind of got stuck into a place where it wasn't working. That's when I kind of got more into bartending and things like that. Okay. And I would say it did help shape me because I think I was stuck on the cerebral side of things. It wasn't making sense intellectually. But then when I got with people and I could see and sit with people and sit and listen to their stories and just be with them and be real with them, then you saw truth. And it wasn't in the words in a book. It wasn't in any philosophical statement. It was just sitting with people and being with them. That's all it is. To me, that is the only truth that I know.
Wow. That's cool.
So yeah, that's cool. Bartending did help me get there. I didn't realize that at the time, but I knew that I like to be with people, and that's where I got my energy. Okay. I mean, I always made the joke when I decided finally to leave bartending and go, seminary, I was leaving one spirit for another. But it was a good exercise. I've mentioned there's some things written about communion at the brass rail. Right. But the darkness of bars was something that drew me to it as well. How
do you mean?
So there was this Baptist preacher who was a great friend of mine, who was one of our managers there. His name's Mark Garrett. He's still down in Chattanooga. And he was one of the managers at the Bennigan's, the bar that I worked at. And he was a good Baptist preacher. And he would just come in and I would talk, and everybody, I would talk to people, and I would go, I guess at one point, Jen was a Presbyterian, and her dad was a Presbyterian minister, my wife. I was Episcopalian. Everybody knew my dad was a priest. Okay. And, I'd be sitting around the bar. Of course, we're going to talk stuff. I mean, we didn't separate religion in the bar. I enjoyed talking about it. That's what it was for. And so this guy, though, this minister, who just a greatest guy in the world, he would just go in there. He would just pull me in the office. He'd say, "Do you not see the spiritual darkness that is in this place?" And I would just be like, "Yeah, I say it." But I was so into the partying and the fun that it was such a distraction. I could not deal with that. And he was in such a different place, spiritually mature place, that he saw it, and he was there ministering to people.
So he was talking about the darkness that was in and
around the Baptist, people. So he didn't drink it.
Right.
I never had a problem with that. Yeah. But the darkness of, we had one of our bar regulars committed suicide.
Yeah.
I mean, people are dealing with a lot of stuff. That's why they're drinking.
Right.
But I didn't really see the darkness at the time, but now I look back on it, and I do think part of me is sort of drawn to seeing people when they're in their darkness. So I don't know what that says about me, but yeah, bartending was very helpful. And then I started, anyway, I got back into church eventually, decided to go to seminary. So that's where I was going to talk about the theology bit, because I sort of talked about the philosophy bit, but then I was really looking forward to, in seminary, learning about theology, because what I realized, what I did is I just replaced theology with philosophy, and I was going to find truth in philosophy. Oh, I can't find it there. I'll go to theology.
Sure.
Theology, like I said, it got you somewhere to it. So I go into systematic theology class, and I'm like all gung-ho that it's all going to finally make sense. They did not make it all. It does not all make sense. Everybody's coming at it from their own perspectives, from different angles. This is one way. This is a very helpful way for me to look at how we look at the Bible, or how we look at any of this stuff when we're talking about Christianity and theology. The layers of interpretation that we have to go through are so countless. Just to get from my 21st century mindset that has a little computer in my pocket, from a late 19th century where all this fundamentalism is coming up in America, what that did to our culture, not to even mention the great wars and all the death that all that did. Then you're getting into all the reformers, the Anglican Reformation, different than the European Reformation, Calvin, Beza, Luther, you're going through all their minds. Then you're getting into the Catholic scholasticism. Then you're getting, you got Aquinas, and you get in the church fathers. You just keep going further and further back, trying to find. And so you see all these layers, and you realize, okay, so can you ever get to the truth?
Wow. Yeah.
Of what the gist is.
Yeah.
I don't, so for me, it was a weird exercise, because in philosophy, you were sort of going, you're taking a thought and you're going as far as you can this way. In theology, it's almost like you're taking that thought, but you're trying to take it the other way, in an inner way. I don't know if that makes sense. It's trying to take it into the place of where it begins instead of where it ends.
Where it ends.
So I had a real problem with, you have to deconstruct everything, all your thought, and then put it back together. And that's what seminary really does. That was my experience at seminary, is it teaches you have to make your own theology, which is not what I thought I was signing up for. I thought that there was already a book I could read. So let me get to the apophatic tradition. So in studying in seminary, what I finally got to is this tradition in the church called the apophatic tradition. And it basically says you can't say anything about God, because anything you say about God is inherently untrue, because God is beyond us, so far beyond us
that we can't describe.
There is absolutely no way. Even our words are just like whispers of nothingness when it comes to the majesty of God. And I love that idea, because it really just takes the cerebral, it takes it all out of it. And then what are you left with? Experience.
Okay.
I mean, now if you can do that, I mean, now the problem is I'm a cerebral guy. I love to think, and I think it's helpful for us. I want to make things work and fit together and stuff like that. It's not going to save you, man. It doesn't save me. Wow. I don't know how people live in their head all the time. So I don't know. How do you live in your head?
I try not to. I find myself caught there at times, and that's something that we've talked a lot about on the podcast, is the idea of getting to experience, and how do you get out of your head enough to really experience the deeper inner parts that sometimes we don't want to go to.
No, we don't.
Sometimes we don't know how to go to.
No.
And sometimes there's so much difficulty to get there. It's just more comfortable to find something and latch onto it and say, that's my thought.
Yeah.
That's my belief. That's my creed, my whatever.
Yeah.
Instead of being in a position where, like, open and learning and uncovering each day, right? Versus, okay, I found what I want to believe. This is great. This works for me. Well, that's good. But tomorrow, 6 months from now, a year from now, it may not. Something may happen where that starts to fall apart.
Totally get that. That makes me think. I just left a Bible study where we're taking the story of y'all are gonna love this. This is not good. Lot's oldest daughter. I mean, it's a terrible story. Genesis 19, where Lot gives up his daughters to be gang raped, and then then they don't do that, and then they get their dad Lot drunk to sleep with them because they're trying to progenitor. Anyway, it's all this stuff, and we're doing this Bible study in there, and one of the questions is like, why do we never talk about this Bible story? And I'm like, this is terrible. I mean, but there's a lot of interesting things in it, right? You can stay in the story forever and ever, but you get in it and you're like, there's no good bow on this. You're not wrapping this up with a bow and saying God is good. God just wiped out a whole city. I mean, anyway, that's what I like, is that messiness.
Yeah.
I don't know how I got into that.
Why do you think you're drawn to that?
Because it's real. I hate this. I hate
the easy answer
easy answers.
Quick response.
I hate this stuff that we all have to make ourselves perform and look great. And anyway, so the apophatic stuff got me going about how we really can't say anything about anything, which is a pretty zen way of looking at things, right? I dug that. So that gets us into, so then where's your theology? Where do you find truth? And that's why I said you start finding it in God, and I mean in people. And I think that's it, because I think God and people are the same thing. We're in each other. So I don't know why we make it this hard and we have to start reading all this stuff. I really think that's really it.
that we can experience God just in our interaction with each other.
Just sitting here, I'm experiencing God in you. You're experiencing God in me. That's it. And we act like this is some. I don't know what people are wanting. I mean, to me, this is good enough. Yeah. Like me sharing with you, you sharing with me. Yeah. I think that is a very holy thing. Am I on top of the world? Like, ooh, we're having a great party. No, but it is a real interaction. It's genuine. It's authentic. God's there. I don't. I think people miss experiences of God because they think it's something else. I don't know what they're thinking God is. I mean, God is right here. It's just a different dimension that we're already in, you know?
Well, and I think it's, you talked about those layers that we have to dig through before. And I think we have those just in our own experiences as well, not just in our head, but given our experiences with people or with traditions or families or all those things. All those are kind of layers too sometimes.
Absolutely.
That we have to find our way through.
Yeah, you named it, man. So I went through all the theology. Yeah. So before you can even get to the theology, you got to deconstruct your own inner workings. You got to deconstruct your own family. You got to sit outside of it and look at it and say, oh, look, I was the fourth child in a family of four. I'm the baby. So I'm a only child, and I also function as a baby. I had a totally different upbringing than my older sister, who's 11 years older than me. We are not from the same family.
Interesting.
Just absolutely not. And for the concept in our culture is that we are all come from the same families and stuff. And it's absurd. We don't have the same experiences. So we got to deconstruct that before we can even get to the bigger deconstruction of the whole social construct. I mean, theology and the whole cultural thing that we're going through right now, that's all, well, never mind. Here's one thing about seminary that's cool. And I do think they designed this. I think there was some really good thought put into the way they designed this. You have this first year, and everybody, I mean, some people leave after the first year. I mean, because they're like, this is not for me.
Yeah, not what I thought it was.
Yeah. And then, so the first summer, though, is your clinical pastoral education. So that's where you go work in a hospital. Okay. And so I went to Erlanger. It's Trauma 1 in Chattanooga. And that's where the rubber sort of,
they're
trying to get you to see, okay, you got this idea that God is all love, and this is what I think they're doing. I mean, you get these people in there that think God is all happy, clappy, love, 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 and then they're like, oh, here's a motorcycle accident where 2 guys just died, and their 3-year-old's birthday is the next morning. You go talk to the family, a whole family of people that are devastated and crying, and you go tell them that God is good. Oh, and so that's what clinical pastoral education did for me. It was the hardest thing. It was the best thing because it punches you in your face. Yeah. And I know guys that do it, they love it. Like they stay on and do it because it is real and it's gut wrenching and it's hard.
Yeah, you're in the moment, so there's no escaping it.
But it's meaningful, and you're with these people in those hard moments. So anyway, that was a very powerful. I mean, I could go on and talk about experience after experience that happened in the hospital, but that's where I sort of started. I mean, I'm like, okay, so again, it's not in a book. It's not A plus B equals C. It's not algebra. It doesn't work that way. I mean, so how does it work? Why is there suffering? And so then it just pushes me. And so that's where I was like, that's a long intro to get to talking about suffering. Because for me, that is sort of the quintessential thing. There's something in it that it changes us.
In suffering?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's horrible, and it's painful, and it's necessary, and it's beautiful in its own way. And when I say beautiful, it's not beautiful. I mean, so what do you think about it? Talk to me. I would love to know, when I say suffering, what do you think? What words come to your mind? Because beautiful, when I say beautiful, suffering isn't beautiful.
It's not beautiful in the traditional sense of the word. But I mean, I think there are times when you experience an incredibly tragic story, let's say in a book or a movie or something like that, and you're like, that was a beautiful story. There's something about the way it unfolded and what happened in the people and seeing them change from where they started to where they ended up. And that part of it is beautiful. You know, maybe it's not in the day-to-day, how do I feel, but in the kind of overarching, what am I learning and where am I on the other side of it?
Right. If you can get to the other side of it, you can see the change that's suffering and the positive of suffering. But when you're talking to people going through suffering, you can't talk to them about the positive of it.
Yeah.
There's something in suffering. It takes us down to who we really are.
Well, and sometimes, it's so intense that there's no ability to see anything else. Like some of the distractions or other things that might have been around just go away because it's so hard.
Right. And then some people, I've seen some people deal with suffering in such different ways. I've seen some people deal with it terribly, angry and defiant, and they made it worse. And I've seen other people treat it the best they could. I don't know. I don't want to make this too personal for you, but I mean, have you experienced great suffering when you witness someone suffer? It's different than when you suffer yourself.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And I think, I think my family historically has had a lot of mental illness and depression and other things like that, and seeing someone in the midst of that and seeing them become not themselves is hard. It's hard, to recognize someone in the depth of that, knowing that they don't know how to get out of it. They're not able to get out of it, and just how you interact or support or present or anything in that moment when there just doesn't seem to be any answers, medically or even spiritually at that point. You're just like, what do you do with this?
Well, and that's where I go with that. So to me, that perfect. So that is deep suffering, right? And so sometimes that deep suffering, there is no bow to it.
Right.
There's death. And so, I mean, I do think that our tradition holds that it's transformed, and we hold on to that. But some people the story of resurrection is going to be enough for some people, and some people it's not enough for some people. And some people, I don't know what people are holding on to. Why do people believe in Jesus? Or, I mean, is it really the whole thing, I'm trying to get away from hell? I mean, are still people trying to do that? What do you think? Do you think most people are still trying that?
I think some people, that's their motivation for sure. Yeah. You know,
See, and this is part of my problem, because I work in this isolated kind of place where I deal with people that don't usually think that way. Because I mean, that's not the point at all in my thinking. It's I mean, we're already good. Everything's fine there. The whole point of it is just to become more and more like him, and to keep walking in his ways, and to keep loving people. That's it.
Yeah.
So the salvation is just living like Jesus, right? That's it. I have real simple theology.
Versus being a distant, out in the future kind of
all this
something
stuff.
You're waiting on, hoping for, however you want to say.
And I know, yes. Let's go back to this thing I started with before. So if we're suffering, and so in general theology, there are these pastoral responses, is what they're called, to the problem of suffering and to the problem of theodicy.
Okay.
And they're all highly cerebral, and they're trying to get God to be, God's still good, God's still all powerful, and God is still all loving. Quite frankly, logically, they don't work. I don't think you can do it logically. I haven't heard anybody do it logically yet, how you can do it. Because, so God either allows this suffering to happen, right?
Yeah.
So does God allow the suffering to happen? We say he does not will it.
Okay.
If God willed suffering, then he would be a bad God. He would be a bad God. So we say, no, God does not will suffering, but he allows suffering. For me, that's a heck of a thing, even to say, I'm going to pray to a God that allows suffering. Okay? Yeah. So that's where I'm trying to get. It got me to a place where God's not this happy, clappy God.
Okay.
And it is a weird place to be, because I believe God is love. God is love. God is love, right?
So how they come together?
How does it hold it? How does God allows suffering? So the only way I can do that is that somehow God uses suffering to transform us. Okay? So then okay. Is that enough? Is all I get to.
Yeah.
I have a real problem with suffering. Can you tell? So the thing is, though, do you get what I'm saying? If there's only one thing that's over the one ultimate reality, then God contains all evil as well. So there is evil within God. Or is there? Do you believe in evil? I do. Can evil reside within the Godhead? Traditional theology says no.
Right.
I don't know if our theology, I think we're reinterpreting. So what is evil? Is evil suffering? This is the problem with church. We use all these churchy words, right, and we don't define the terms. So we're all talking about different things.
Yep.
So, what are we really talking about? Are we talking about suffering, or are we talking about sin?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So is evil the same thing as suffering?
Yeah.
What do you think? Is suffering evil?
I don't feel like they're the same thing.
Do you believe in evil, maybe? Maybe I start there.
Oh, man. Some days. Just to be real honest. Sometimes I'm like, what else could this be? This just feels so foreign and destructive. How could this come from the source of what I feel is good? So you kind of hit that. Yeah. And so at times I might use that word as the label for whatever that unknown is.
Yeah.
Even if that's the right word or not, that's the word I have.
Yeah.
And so there are times that I might say, gosh, that's just pure evil.
Yeah.
And just seeing some tragic, terrible something, that just seems to have no point.
That suffering is evil, I believe.
Yeah.
So that's where I get to. I think some suffering can do good things for us. So it becomes that whole question, is cancer bad? Cancer's just trying to be good. Cancer's just trying to live. Cancer's just a cell trying to, right?
Man.
So I just don't know. I think suffering, we can't really say. So you get to a weird relativism place and you can say nothing is good, nothing is bad. Right. I can't do that because I do hold on to ultimate good. And I don't mean ultimate good like ultimate completeness. Maybe that would be a better term. Okay. So maybe we need to start using our language a little differently. Maybe we need to start interpreting things better. Suffering and the problem of evil, I think, is a problem that was set up by the cultural ways that we looked at the world 2,000 years ago through all those lenses we've been talking about. Yeah. And nobody has really done a really good job at looking at what we're talking about anymore. I think our anxiety comes from a lot of misplaced ignorance of not really knowing what we're anxious about.
Wow, yeah.
We have these terms for things. I think we have a lot of emotion, but if you really sit down and whittle down with your brain and think about it, I mean, you can think your way out of a lot of this anxiety. I don't know. Does that make sense? Do you agree with that? Maybe not.
Well, I think... we have an appetite for categorization.
Yes.
We have a tendency to paint good or bad on things and just kind of stop with those two.
Yes.
Instead of recognizing the blend and the pure mystery of all of it. Right. We don't know, but we're creatures of wanting to know.
Absolutely.
And that's not a bad thing. It's not bad to want to know the answers.
I love it.
It drives us forward, which is great. But if our only destination is the answer, I don't know that that's the wholeness that you're talking about.
Well, and I guess that's where I got to, because the answer escapes you. I mean, the answer, right. I don't know. But so where I go then is I get back into the suffering, because that's the place where it's authentic and real. And that's where we connect. This is where I really think where Jesus came to us and where we can bring Lent kind of into this, is where what connects us is the suffering. And that's it. Mm-hmm. I mean, what else was God missing? Did God suffer before Christ? That's an interesting thought. I don't know. Do you think? They're all together. They're all at the same time, right? So there was no God without Christ.
Yeah.
How does that work? That doesn't. That's what I'm saying.
But I think when you were talking about the presence of God being in that interaction,
absolutely,
between people, I mean, that's what you're coming back to with the idea of. I mean, there is a bond in suffering.
And there's a bond in suffering, and it's the only thing that we really are together on. We all die.
Yeah.
So because of our inherent deaths, our inherent upcoming deaths, that we all suffer. And so we turn this suffering into, and we categorize it, and we turn it into evil. And it's just the inherent part of living, right? I mean, that's what Buddhism, the whole thing is, life is suffering. And they're not saying life is just, oh, this is terrible. It's just the inherent nature of life is part of it. Yeah. I totally get that, right? I think that's what Jesus is saying. Yeah, life is suffering, and God is entering into it with us. So I think it's the only way that the whole incarnation makes sense, is that we connect through suffering.
Yeah, talk more about that, God entering into it with us.
Okay, so that's what I'm saying. So when we talk about, did God suffer? What is the point of this whole suffering God? Did God need to suffer? Okay. I can't help but get into atonement theory. I don't want to get into that. God, I don't know if God needs to suffer, if we need God to suffer. I think we need God to suffer, but I think God is good enough to suffer for us or suffer with us.
Okay.
But I mean, the notion that God needed to do something, I can't help but get into atonement.
I mean, the definition of compassion, right, is suffering with.
Yeah, right. When you're with somebody and they're suffering, you are opening yourself to just experience their pain. And somehow that helps them. Not everybody. Some people like it and some people don't like it. Mm-hmm. When that happens, though, if they're able to open up like that, it's the most holy moments I've ever experienced in my life, and everybody knows it.
Wow.
This is the rub with suffering. We all try to avoid it, and yet that's the meat of life.
Mm. You would miss those holy moments.
Yeah, that is where all the change takes place. That's where all the good, that's where, if we're suffering, that is where somewhere in the back of our minds, things are going on, going like, well, we got to change this, or something's got to change, and things start moving, right? There's energy in suffering. There's energy in chaos and stuff, and I think it kind of gets it moving. There's energy in suffering.
Yeah.
Not all bad.
Okay. So speaking of that energy, as a priest and as someone who's entering those environments frequently, whether you're visiting the hospital, or you're at someone's home, or you're just speaking with someone, how do you surf that energy?
You just take it. I don't know. You don't surf it. Yeah. You let it come on you. I don't know. You just take it.
Gotcha.
But that's what I'm saying. It's not like over heavy. It's not over burdensome. It feels like the right thing. That's what I'm saying. I think when we're together with one another and we're able to do that with one another, it's not overly burdensome. It feels right. And yet that's what I say. And yet we're always running away from suffering. Yeah. We don't know what to do with it because I don't know if we don't know what to do with God with it, maybe, or.
Well, and I think one of the worst parts of suffering is isolation.
Isolation, that loneliness, that's the worst.
And so the idea of you talking about coming together in the suffering, that the idea that somewhere in your mind, if you have that concept that you're on your own with it.
That is what we believe while we say we are in Christ. The suffering is we are supposed to all be joined together. And I do believe that in some weird way, like we are all connected in ways that we don't see, like it's other dimensions that we're somehow all connected. And so when we can take on each other's suffering, that's the ebb and flow of the way it's supposed to go, those joyous times, those sorrowful times, that whole Ecclesiastes thing, I think that is the way it works. So it's not something to be avoided like we do as much. Yeah. It's not like we go toward it, it's like we want to go toward it, but I don't know. We need to change our how we're interacting with suffering. Yeah. How is Christianity helping anybody suffering right now? That's a good question. How is Christianity helping anybody suffering, Now, I would say a Christian is helping other people. Christianity isn't helping anything. But Christians help people. So again, to the suffering, it does. It comes back to the person. It comes back to you, me, being one-on-one. It's just, we can talk about it all the time. That's why I brought up that whole tradition. We can't say anything about God. It comes down to the experience and the suffering. There's truth in that. I don't see truth much else. We all suffer. We can all join together in that.
Well, I was going to say that's accessible to everyone. As far as if being able to come together, that's
we can all enter
everybody
into,
can do that.
This is terrible sometimes.
Well, and sometimes that needs to be said. Sometimes it's the dancing around it that
I tell people all the time, sit in your filth, sit in your filth. We do not sit in our filth enough. I know that sounds terrible. I was a great father. No, seriously, we do something and we're like, well, we got to clean that up because it's all messy and stuff. Yeah. Well, maybe you need to sit in it for a while and see what's going on. We just move, like we react. We're not sitting in our own filth. We're just responding to everything. I want to get back somehow to the suffering and theodicy. There's some part of that. Suffering is not evil. Suffering can feel evil. But I don't think suffering is evil. But I think suffering can feel damn evil.
Yeah.
And there's different, again, if we start getting into semantics, what do we mean by suffer? We go, obviously evil things will suffer. All right. Have we exhausted this?
I don't know that we ever could, but I think that may be a good place to wrap this up.
Did we ever make a coherent thought?
If today's conversation piqued your interest in this type of dialogue about theology and spiritual matters, we'd like to make you aware of an in-person opportunity. St. John's Cathedral hosts a casual gathering called Cocktails and Conversation, led by Chris Hackett and Madison Heinsohn. The group meets on alternating Tuesday evenings in a variety of locations in downtown Knoxville. Attendees are welcome to grab a drink, enjoy appetizers, and lively conversation. If you're interested, please email hello@morethanonewaypod.com for more details and to be added to the email list for date and location information.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the More Than One Way podcast, brought to you by the Center for Spiritual Practice in Knoxville, Tennessee. We really appreciate your time and would love to hear your feedback. You can reach us by emailing hello@morethanonewaypod.com, or you can connect with us on social media using the handle @morethanonewaypod. If you found this episode helpful, we hope that you'll share it with your friends, with your family, with people you work with all the people who you know. Thank you and take care.